This week on Life After 50, I'm going to introduce you to a very interesting man named Andrew Wright. Andrew spent the majority of his adult life running investigations and intelligence. He looked at things like who's funding ISIS, the war crimes of Vladimir Putin, gang activity, and believe it or not, the diamond industry. This is one of those conversations that's so very interesting. So strap in, get ready, and here is Andrew Wright.
So I've received feedback on our new program here, and everybody loves it. But one thing that I've gotten back is people saying, is there any way we could get somebody who's in their 40s who hasn't hit 50 yet, who's in sort of a transitional sort of phase? And my original thing was no, but then when I received a couple more emails about this, I said, you know what, I'll give it a try. And then I met you, and I'm like, perfect. This is a perfect example. So You're in your mid-40s. You were originally born in Canada, now a resident of the UK.
Correct.
But you have spent a few decades here around the world working investigations as an intelligence, we'll say, professional at various different stages. And I want to go over some of the intelligence that you've actually conducted, because you and I, when we spoke about this, when we met, and we've only known each other for a couple of weeks now. When we met, I hear intelligence, and then out of your mouth, it's Russia, Ukraine, diamond industry, gangs, dangerous gangs, and ISIS. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all right, this guy has got a interesting story. So you did, was it for the Canadian government, the Canadian police, or the Canadian military? You did intelligence zeroing in on some of the most dangerous gangs there are in Canada. Mm-hmm. So who was that for? Was that for the police, or was that for the government?
Throughout the domestic career, I kind of navigated all levels of government. So depending on kind of, where I was, it was like local police, provincial level authorities and agencies and task force, and then also at the federal level.
So when you're in Canada gathering intelligence on, let's say, I think you said it was Somalian gangs was one of them.
Yeah. What
kind of stuff are Somalian gangs doing in Canada? I mean, what kind of crimes?
Sudanese Somali gangs, particularly in Calgary, Alberta. They're doing all sorts of crimes, super violent stuff, and then they're rival to each other. So then there's just their violent interactions with each other, and then the consequences for the public at large. But it's everything from, just drug distribution to running prostitution rings, in conjunction actually with the indigenous population and stuff like that.
When you're called upon to run intelligence on, let's say, a gang, and whether that gang is somebody like the Hells Angels or a Somalian gang or whatever the gang may be, MS-13, where do you even start? Do you start with, hey, they're trafficking kids, we need to zero in on how they're getting the kids and where they're sending the kids? Where does an intelligence gathering start?
Well, I think, the intelligence trade is all about trying to, detect crime in order to prevent it or disrupt it. I mean, that's a big part of it. That's why you do intelligence versus just reactionary law enforcement action, where a crime's been reported and then you start to investigate it. You want to get in, you want to actually conduct an effort to try and understand what's at play, even though if perhaps it's not sort of on the surface or is not even being reported. So a lot of the things you'll do is assessments of sort of your community environment, your operating environment. You can generally kind of intuit that there should be certain crimes. So you start kind of collecting and talking to sources in order to say that, okay, there probably should be crimes here. So let's kind of start turning over some rocks in order to sort of find some leads that otherwise would not have been sort of kind of come to the agency naturally.
So let's specifically go into prostitution, because you said that you gathered intelligence on prostitution rings.
Human trafficking, in a way. I mean, prostitution's a tricky one because I think we can think of the crime as intuitively, but typically it's like kind of waxes and wanes in terms of what is actually the criminal aspect of that. And prostitution, for all intents and purposes, isn't necessarily a crime, especially in Canada. I mean, it's the act. I think there was a particular crime on the book some years ago, and it was overturned, saying it was unconstitutional because the government can't say that a person isn't entitled to pursue sort of their career path, which is weird in the Canadian sense of things, right? They don't want to touch that, but they'll touch everything else in your life, right?
Right. So if God forbid my sister wants to be a prostitute, the Canadian government saying, "Hey, you can't stop her from doing that. That's what she'd like to do." Yeah. So then we'll go a little deeper. Yeah. So a lot of times people get confused smuggling versus trafficking, especially when you're looking at the southern border coming into the U.S. If somebody pays to be brought over into the United States, that's smuggling. Yeah. If somebody is taken against their will and then held in a half house or a stash house and then put to work as a prostitute against their will, that is actually trafficking. So what you're doing is, all right, you're looking in, obviously, we'll just use, I know prostitution and rings like that have both boys and girls, but let's just stick to the girls. Yeah. So in this particular case, or in these cases, young girls have been abducted at some level. Maybe they're runaways, maybe they're just taken or whatever it may be. And now they're basically forced into the world of prostitution, which they didn't voluntarily, from a constitutional standpoint, say, this is what I want to do with my career. Right. So in that particular case, when you're starting an intelligence gathering, you know that something's taking place, but now you've got to kind of piece it together.
Yeah, I think so. For human trafficking, also a very difficult crime to actually get on top of, because I think the predominant trend is you might have somebody in a gang that would groom some sort of at-risk youth. And the way that they would do that is actually sort of lull them into maybe this sort of like this false notion that they're in a relationship with that individual. And then once they have that sort of element of control over them, that they believe that they're, in love, come with me, across the country, and we'll go over to this place and sort of, we'll make a lot of money as you're my girlfriend. Oh, but, in our gang, you have to sleep with all the gang members. And then this manipulation starts, where that actually becomes super problematic. And this isn't just sort of a one-off example. This is sort of the thing you're up against, is when you actually engage with them. They don't in their mind think that they've been coerced, right, into something. And so that they don't really, they think, there's something has gone wrong, but they're not actually super aware that they've been coerced into this. They still feel that there's some, emotional connection, and they don't want to admit that they've been a victim, and they don't want to admit to the fact that they've been sort of duped into this. So even sort of dealing with the victim, they don't actually want to play ball with you, because that's an admission that there's,
that there's wrongdoing.
There's super wrongdoing. So
plus they've got to be afraid. They've got to be afraid that if they rat out, a gang member is going to wind up chopping them into pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So even that's going to be your starting point, is there's a victim and the victim wants justice. But then in the minds of these oftentimes young women, they don't actually see that there's a path ahead. And so you don't really have a case, because you don't have that victim saying that, they've done some wrongdoing. We were in love, this is my boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. So it actually becomes quite difficult. So I think where you now, as a sort of an intelligence professional, you need to start looking at the cases or large sort of syndicates from different angles, not necessarily relying on the victim to actually come forward and make your case. So in terms of, an exercise we did was looking at kind of array of where, the, escorts or something may start or advertise, using, technology to scrape all the phone numbers that, some John might contact them on, and then cross-reference that with your police records to say, okay, who owns these phone numbers. And we did get, in that exercise, we did get lucky. A handful of phone numbers within thousands of escorts actually hit upon numbers that were attributed to biker gangs. And so that's where you start to say, okay, this isn't, there's something a little bit hinky here. Why is that phone number related to a biker, but it's her in an independent sense, actually, just pursuing her right to employment.
All right. So using this case of the biker gang, let's just say Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
So if it's the Hell's Angels, and you're gathering that intelligence, and you sort of get your first ping, right? You're like, hey, this cell, that cell, communications, something's going on here.
Right.
There's an advertisement now going on that they'll you could hook these people up or whatever it may be, and you're starting to see what forms into this is how you commit this crime. It's funny you bring this up because you're familiar with Rudy Giuliani, right?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was interviewing Rudy Giuliani, and Rudy Giuliani was saying that it was very easy for him as a prosecutor to catch organized crime, because when you're going to prostitute a body or traffic a body, or you're going to steal a car and chop it up into pieces, or sell drugs, or to launder money, there's only certain ways to which you can do it. So although Rudy Giuliani is not a criminal, although the left would like to tell you he is, although he wasn't a criminal at the time, he was able to think like a criminal because it was very logical. How do I get rid of this? Or how do I monetize that? To where when it was time to actually try to catch the next terrorist attack in New York City, that became very difficult because now he had to put his mind into the mind of an irrational person who was willing to carry out a crime for the sake of religion or for the sake of believing that they're going to go up and Allah's going to have a whole bunch of virgins. He's like, that is no longer chopping up a car and selling its parts. That is, how do I get in the mind of a psychotic person who's willing to kill themselves to kill innocent people? So when you're in an intelligence situation like this, to where it's like, hey, this smells like trafficking, it moves like trafficking, it's trafficking, you now have your basis. When you're now moving further into an investigation to actually be able to hand all the proof over you need to whoever you're handing it over, so this way they could now go in and solve that problem, or make the arrests and prosecute. Does it get to a point in time where there's a certain level of danger for you, the intelligence gatherer, where you're like, hey, I can blow my cover here, they may catch me. If somebody in the Hells Angels catches me trying to bring them down, they're gonna freaking chop you up and kill you in 2 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, if there's undercover operations, yeah, for sure, there's that level of danger. Yeah.
So now, when you're gathering that information from an intelligence standpoint, is there a point of where you're actually handing that over to somebody, handing that over to a higher authority?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the nature of your unit or the organization, whether sort of the organization is specialized in a particular type of intelligence that it gathers in. Maybe it's got specialization in signals intelligence, so then it would gather that. And then if there's something to it, they might hand that over then to another agency that has a different mandate in order to maybe take that into an investigation phase or to continue it on in terms of another phase. And so that's why, I mean, you speak about intelligence sharing a lot and ensure that is actually occurring, because no agency, and rightfully in a democracy, has it all, right? So there's that. That's why essentially you have the different agencies with different focuses, because it would be a bit scary for them all to have it all. To have what? So one agency has full power. Yeah. At the other end of the spectrum, though, there has been criticism, at least here in the United States, that these agencies won't share their intelligence with each other, and making one agency basically try to do something with their hands tied behind their back. Yeah, absolutely. It becomes, I mean, at the end of the day, even though it can be kind of sexy, so to speak, in intelligence agency or service or law enforcement, I mean, we're still bureaucrats bound by sort of bureaucratic processes. And so when it comes down to that, sometimes an intelligence service might, be like really heavy on enforcing its secrecy. And so that the idea of sharing something is sort of an antithesis to your kind of day-to-day. So it becomes actually just sort of like in your gut, sort of, I don't really want to share this. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble or not.
Really?
Yeah, as a practitioner. So and then agencies kind of really sort of start to stick to themselves. Once you give it to another agency, you don't know how they're going to run with it, and then is it going to jeopardize your investigation? So you get all these sort of just really difficult sort of bureaucratic processes fighting against each other.
Is there when you're in that sort of thing and you're dealing with gangs, is it high stress? I mean, is it the sort of thing that is always on your mind, or did you have the ability to cut it off at 5 o'clock, so to say, and let it go?
I don't know. Maybe I'm broken inside. I'd never really considered myself at risk at all, or like was worried about my own kind of safety. Mm-hmm. The only thing that ever stuck in your head is, you get a particular kind of, I don't know, victim that sort of maybe for some reason sticks in your mind.
So you have
listen to an intercept, and it's just that something sort of in somebody's tone, and they're vulnerable. It's kind of
so that bothers you because you want to help that person.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a great lead question, because I would assume, I just know my own personality, and from when I was doing, investigative journalism, mm-hmm. and when I was investigating drop houses where illegal aliens were being dropped, mm-hmm. and the stories were that the cartels would literally take a young girl, and if you and I were the cartel and I had the phone, I'd say to you, all right, Andrew, start raping her. And then I would be calling the father back in Guatemala or, Brazil, wherever the person was from. For sure. And I'd say, hey, Dad, by the way, I want you to listen to this. And there you are, raping his daughter. His daughter's crying or whatever it may be. Right. And the father's at home. He says, send me $5,000 today, or this happens again tomorrow. Mm. And so I remember when I was getting those stories and you sort of knew where the drop houses were, it was devastating. It was ripping me to shreds that I knew that there were young girls in that drop house. And I'm like, why aren't we just raiding that now? And it becomes frustrating because you can't do anything. It's another agency that's doing it, and they're doing their investigation. Yeah. So I guess that's what you're referring to when you're saying you're sort of thinking about the victim stays in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. And on to your point too, I mean, that's very daunting. It's more daunting than your consideration for your personal safety is when you can't get something done. Yeah. And sometimes there's not an arrangement, there's not a protocol in place. People don't want to act without, certain sort of permissions, and you just, the apparatus just sort of stalls, sort of grinds itself to a halt in something. And there's actually, there's people sort of suffering. And this is actually part of one of my major frustrations most recently with the investigations in Ukraine is, you're on the ground dealing with things, and then you have to sort of deal with a headquarters in another country, and they just do not have appreciation for what you're dealing with. And then the answers and decisions that come to you are just so out of left field and don't have any engagement with sort of the reality on the ground, and you're just left like, that's a really bad call time and time again. It just burns you out.
I was going to say, it's sort of like when you have to deal with a cold-hearted person and an incompetent person who just, sometimes they fall into one person, and you're sitting there as a competent, passionate guy who says, hey, I'm gathering intelligence. I'm doing an investigation for the sake of catching a crime or preventing a crime to be able to continue to be carried out. Yeah. And you're sitting back talking about red tape and, dotting I's and crossing T's. What the fuck, right?
I know. Yeah. Infuriating.
So sticking with the gang stuff for a second, because we're going to come full circle to a lot bigger stuff than that. But do people underestimate how many gangs there are and what these gangs are actually carrying out? Because I think the movies have sort of portrayed the biker gangs as a bunch of guys riding their motorcycles, hanging out at a biker bar, having a bunch of beer, and then just breaking windows to steal somebody's wallet. Yeah. It goes much further than that. No.
Yeah, I would say it's really hard to pin down actually like what a gang is or what an organized crime syndicate is, right? Yeah. I think we generally have these notions of something that's quite cut sort of like a traditional organization, like it has a nice org chart and here's the boss and everything is just really sort of tidy, right? Italian mafia style, or the Bloods and Crips sort of style. And there are those traditional elements, but a gang as it exists with this sort of gang membership might exist for the actual honest sort of human need to have actually a brotherhood, right? Where you might be on the street and okay, there's some protection, sort of a gang mentality, which you can almost empathize with in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get into like how those structures then translate into the actual criminal element, it just becomes super nebulous, like cross currents, different organizations commingling, the double cross, and it just becomes the hardest thing to pin down. From a law enforcement perspective, it would be amazing if you just had a clear organization that you could uncover and then start attacking. But it becomes kind of this network approach where you've got one individual who maybe has an idea and they do something with somebody that's not even within the gang or in the organization, and it's just, and who are their connections and who do they have an opportunity with, a criminal opportunity with. And it's sort of trying to navigate that just becomes super difficult to deal with.
You brought up a point about, what leads somebody to be a gang. That was the other thing that, during my work and doing my movies, MS-13.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, what leads a young 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old? Because when people think gangs, I go back to the movies. It's always, it's the biker who is 45 years old and he's got the white beard and the chain wallet. My God, you got 10, 11, 12-year-olds going into gangs like MS-13. And you say, why is that? And because there's no family at home. These people are looking for family. They're looking for something that we all subscribe to, wanting to be loved and receive love back, or tribe, be part of something. And same thing here, gangs that are in the United States that are, gangs in a lot of the inner cities. These are kids who they're fatherless. Father's gone off.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there and they're looking for somebody to look up to and protection, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's how they easily fall into it. So when you're doing the investigations and the gathering of this information, what would you say is more dangerous, the biker gang or the Somalian gang?
I guess dangerous. How do you define dangerous in terms of violence?
Well, I mean, dangerous in order to be able to carry out their crimes. Let me change it. Who's smarter?
There's a bit of respect for bikers. I mean, they have code, order, rules.
Yeah.
There's some logic and rationale to it. I think it's the like a troubled maybe a troubled youth that just does not have any social skills or any cognitive capability to deal with the world, and then the way they interact with the difficulty of the world is just lashing out with random violence. I think that's this could be debated, I guess, right? So is the cold, calculated organization more dangerous than the random violence? I mean,
yeah.
This actually becomes a difficult thing in terms of like strategy in law enforcement too. Do you deal with the violence, or deal with like an organization that perhaps isn't violent but is perhaps controlling and masterminding perhaps that violence?
Back to my original question, because we both got off key on it.
Yeah.
Are there more gangs, and are they more active than people recognize?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of so-called gangs that perhaps don't have that title, right? So I would say it's the networks of delinquency or social disorder that and that's difficult to tackle.
It's difficult.
Like how do you interdict on that?
So one of the things that all gangs, as far as I know, are definitely part of, because it's such an easy way to make money, is the drug trade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is it the blame? This is going to be a crazy question in many ways.
Shoot.
Is it the blame? Do you blame the gangs for pushing these drugs, these very addictive, life-changing, life-destroying drugs, or do you blame the people who continue to use them.
Yeah. Well, it's just sort of back to a comment I made there in terms of the criminal opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, not to be too controversial, but do you blame somebody that if they are provided an economic opportunity to not sort of maybe go down that path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus nothing, you're going to take that. I mean, as a human,
You got to survive.
You got to survive, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I could perhaps personally feel that it's you need to deal with the criminal opportunity versus sort of the tribalism. I mean, and this is I know I've been in lots of debates with colleagues in terms of this, like going after a gang because this is tidy and this is the name and these are all the members, and trying to like enforce on that and profiles of all those individuals, or going after the market that perhaps a few of them are involved in. Mm. So yeah, I mean, for drugs and like like fentanyl is like a major drug is. You can't just combat the people that will be selling it. You obviously have to combat, the supply chain and disrupt sort of, that whole thing, the criminal opportunity, the demand for it. I mean, These are the things you really start to have to tackle. You'll never get on top of it. There'll just be somebody else to come and exploit that opportunity.
Of course. I mean, a few months back, it feels like a few months back anyway, Trump had said that he was going to enforce tariffs on both Canada and Mexico, pretty heavy tariffs. And with Mexico, it was stop these people from coming in. Mm-hmm. So you're allowing these migrants to come from South America, Central America, from all around the world, and you're actually facilitating the ability for them to come across our border. You keep this up, you keep the drugs coming up across the border, we're going to tariff you to no end. Mm-hmm. And one of the arguments on the other side was, hey, get your affairs in order. You have over 100,000 people overdosing every single year. Death to overdose, a lot more people are overdosing. If you don't, they're not all dying, but we have 100,000 people dying from overdoses every single year. Get your house in order. Stop blaming us. Mm-hmm. And there's an argument, the chicken or the egg here. If there wasn't such a dependency in Canada, in the United States for drugs, the cartels and then therefore the gangs wouldn't have a business. Mm-hmm. And so it is one of those, what do you stop first? It's the supply and demand. Yeah. So we're setting up the demand, and somebody, like you just said, is going to fill the supply. Yeah. And unfortunately, it just seems to be something that is proliferating. I mean, you may not know the answer to this, but I'd be curious. I think a lot of people would be curious. I mean, I know here in the United States, we've got tens of thousands of gangs with millions of members here in the United States. People would be blown away by how big it is. Yep. In Canada, obviously, you've got a much smaller population. But we here in the United States have a problem. We don't have enough investigators and enough intelligence agents to be fighting back against all the gangs and all the gang members. In the same way with all the illegal aliens we have in here, I mean, the argument is it could be anywhere between the government says 11 million. It's an actual joke. But some people will say, with credit, will say 20 million. I'll say more like 40 million. That's a big number. Meanwhile, we only have a couple of thousand ICE agents. Mm-hmm. It's like trying to stop the ocean from hitting the sand. Yeah. So in your case up there in Canada, are they suffering from the same sort of problem where the number of investigators and intelligence agents are pretty much outnumbered by the amount of crime syndicates there are?
I guess the answer is you're right. I don't know the answer, but speculating on the issue. Resources is always a tough thing in investigations. Like, and it's the thing you'll always be like, we don't have enough resources to tackle this. That'll always be the answer. Mm. But I also think it's a matter of also trying to be smart in your approach to certain things. Like, if you're dedicated to a cause, I mean, even one person can do a lot. Yeah. So it's a matter of, I think, being strategic in the first instance, right? Are you focused on the right aspects of say, a syndicate? If you dedicate 100 officers to sort of one member, and you haven't made the right choice in the first instance, that's 100 officers kind of wasted. Yeah. So it does put, I would say that you'll always have resource constraints, no matter what jurisdiction you are. So it does put demand on being sort of more strategic and better in making the decisions up front and targeting certain things that will actually have a greater effect. And this is the force multiplier of intelligence. If it's operating correctly, you've got a lay of the land. You have a strong understanding of perhaps a network beyond and a particular gang. You understand pressure points, key individuals that you can maybe focus in on, and disrupting one person in a network might have a greater effect on the network rather than just trying to kind of tackle it all. So it puts a lot of demand on just being more intelligent, so to speak, in the first instance.
You move over to the private sector at some point and start doing the same sort of work, but in the diamond industry.
Yeah.
So now you're going corporate.
Yeah.
And now, before you get into the explanation of how it is that you do things to catch diamonds or whatever it may be, and where you did it from, because you were doing it from Canada, just on the surface level, did you see a greater amount of resources and a greater will to catch the crimes through the corporate sector than you did through the government sector?
Yeah, I mean, private sector, they do more with less and are more effective. Absolutely.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about that.
Because they're dealing with their own money.
Yeah, and they're dealing with greater consequence, actually. The consequences. Well, if we don't do this right, we will cease to exist as a business. Major differences, I guess, I saw was you absolutely doing more with less. More strategic decision making in terms of what you're going to tackle, and kind of just making sure that what you're doing is achieves an objective. You can't just do it, and you do see that just the waste that you see in these bureaucracies and agencies is just people working on. What are you working on? I was like, no, those are the people that couldn't play well with the other members, so they're on their own team now, just sort of killing time. It's like playing solitaire or something.
This is why people wanted people wanted Trump. They wanted Trump because he took the business mentality of said, we're going to fix this, versus the government, the lifelong government agency person who wanted to become a House member, who wanted to become a senator, who wanted to become president. They all just sit around, they waste our money, they waste our time, and nothing ever gets done. And this is why people get frustrated. And that's why I knew the answer that you were going to give before you gave it, because there is a will within the corporation to solve it, or else we're not going to be there. So explain from a high level what your job was in the diamond industry, diamond fields, why they needed intelligence and investigations done.
It was as an intelligence analyst for the security department, and so this was early in the career. Once I left the military, so this was kind of early. So I got this exposure. I wish it actually came way later in life, because then I would have appreciated it far more. I think actually, being a young, a kid, I had this notion that everything that is anything is done in the government. And now I've learned that lesson. That's not the case. Everything that's anything is done outside of the government.
That's right.
The government are always knocking on the door of those doing the real work. But so I was an intelligence analyst, and for the company that I worked for, working in that sector, they were my boss was an individual that came in and saw sort of the murkiness of that business and said, well, we want to be responsible as a corporate entity, and we want to make sure that there's no possibility to be complicit in any of the allegations of conflict diamonds or anything like that.
So were the investigations done internally? So this way nobody was doing something bad internally that would give the company a bad name, in terms of like trying to pawn off counterfeit diamonds as being real?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of that intelligence, looked both internally and externally. So the partners or external entities that you might engage with, or external activity that could impact the business, or internally, it's internal bad actors or whatever. So it's kind of looking both internally and externally.
But what was the key that you were trying to? Was it to stop counterfeit diamond trades?
You were part of an apparatus that was seeking to disrupt perhaps the illegal enterprise, the things that lead the whole, supply and demand and sort of sector of conflict diamonds in the world. So you were sort of feeding the moral good, but there was also a bottom line to it. If we're seen to be complicit in this and we're not, we'll take a reputational hit, which could then translate into maybe a financial hit. Mm-hmm. So there was sort of this elegance between maintaining a moral path as well as actually maintaining kind of the corporate path as well.
So I want to get a little sexy here, because everybody has. I mean, I just bought my wife and I, for the longest time, didn't buy each other Christmas gifts, because we're like, every year you feel like you need to up last year's gift.
I know. It's so stressful.
It is stressful, right?
Intelligence does nothing on buying Christmas gifts.
dude, yeah. You are so right. Yeah. I have made some of the worst financial decisions of my life on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Oh yeah.
So for this Christmas, I was like, all right, it's been too long. So I went out and I'm like, what am I going to get my wife? So I bought her this nice little tiny diamond on a necklace. And the thing is, I'm looking at it, I have no idea. I mean, I'm hoping this thing is real. Yeah. I mean, so I'm asking how many carat, what's the clarity? Her answers were nothing to me, because I didn't know. So I was just trying to ask questions to make it sound like I was intelligent. Mm-hmm. The real question why I was how much? And I don't know if I paid $1,500 for something that's fake or something that's real. My wife likes it. She's happy.
Yeah.
Everybody here that's listening has a diamond somewhere in their ring, in their necklace, in their earrings, somewhere.
Right.
How does the fraud inside the diamond industry work? Did you find that out, or am I asking a too difficult question there? I mean, what would you, in your first description, you explained that, we're going to traffic this person. Yeah. We're going to look at the cell phone, see if the calls are. Where do you start to see where the fraud initiates in the world of diamonds?
Well, not to be too controversial, but I think the fraud is the industry of diamonds. I mean, it's nothing really inherently useful as a diamond. Right. The whole value of a diamond is marketing.
It's manufacturing.
Yeah, it's De Beers and campaigns to create a mystique around a diamond. And with Marilyn Monroe, diamond is a girl's best friend.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pure marketing, that the diamond is something to be.
It's amazing. I never thought of it like that. Yeah. Right, because what are you going to do with a diamond? Yeah. There's absolutely nothing. It's just a showcase.
I mean, it can cut other diamonds.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so
in case I'm ever
some use there. So,
in case I'm ever locked up in a diamond mine and I need a diamond, I could cut myself out. But aside from that, I mean, all right. So that's a great answer there. But so going deeper than, or getting past the fact that the fraud is in the industry itself. I mean, what are you actually looking for? I mean, how does the fraud start and where is it carried out?
Well, I mean, not necessarily fraud. I think the major thing is these, the source of diamonds is typically in places where there is, social disorder, civil unrest, and so it's, the idea is that these diamond mines can be controlled by nefarious actors, and then that money can actually feed into their apparatus and then keep them sustaining the civil war or something like that. So the idea on the corporate side, if you are not a nefarious actor, you want to try and combat those things that sort of sully your reputation. So you start looking at kind of where are those mines being controlled by a militia or something. Understanding that, and then making sure and trying to understand how those diamonds flow into the market, and then trying to mitigate that as best you can,
really?
So that that those diamonds over there, those are conflict diamonds. These diamonds over here, these are our diamonds. They're clean.
Really,
but it's super difficult because, and I think, and this is years ago now, so maybe even the science is doing something different, but it is almost scientifically impossible to take two diamonds and say that this came from this mine and this came from another mine. Diamonds are created in the center of the earth, so they all came from the same place essentially once upon a time in Earth history, and so can't really say that one's coming from a diamond from West Africa, or one's coming from a mine from northern Canada.
Now, when you were doing this intelligence and investigations, you were doing this over in Africa, were you not?
Yeah, started actually. There's mines in northern Canada, so
Okay.
yeah, started up in the high Arctic, and then that opportunity kind of parlayed into going to Southern Africa.
Southern Africa.
Yeah.
What's that? I mean, just as a total side note, I mean, I've been to Canada before, a couple of times, and there are some parts of Canada where you drive through and it seems very French, as it would.
Yeah.
And then you go to other parts and, it's just another city, But I got to imagine when you're going to somewhere in South Africa that does it feel fundamentally different than our part of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in South Africa, I mean, communities feel. The one thing that always struck me, and I think I'm used to it now, but is everything's walled.
In what sense?
Like every house will have a wall.
Really?
So when you're outside of communities, everything is just walled off. So if you're navigating a city, it just becomes super hard to say like, oh, is there like, where are the restaurants, where are the the services and these types of things, because they're all walled off. So you sort of need to know where you're going all the time.
I know
that sort of struck me.
One of the places that you said you traveled through was Zimbabwe. And when I think of Zimbabwe, I think of total chaos and what the hell's over in Zimbabwe? Is that just, again, more marketing and media frenzy, or does Zimbabwe does it have its act together?
Well, I don't want to be too scathing of the country, but I mean, definitely does not have its act together.
No.
I mean, it's I think, objectively one of the worst economies on the planet with barely a currency.
But they have diamond mines.
They have diamond mines, yeah. So they have wealth. It's the distribution of that wealth.
Really?
Yeah.
And so if you have would you say Zimbabwe is more or less corrupt?
Yeah, well, actually, the topic of corruption is a super interesting thing, especially spending time, in places like Zimbabwe, is where the regime acts in a certain way that you as a law-abiding citizen and somebody with who's morally upstanding,
yeah,
actually is going to employ a range of what perhaps Westerners might think is a criminal tactics to avoid detection from that government, that if they detect that you have wealth, they're going to come after you, probably with violence, and take it from you.
So if you have wealth and you're in Zimbabwe, they're coming for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it just turns this whole notion of corruption on its head. It's like, okay, if I do things right, I'm going to be a slave to this regime, and I will never get anywhere, which is most people there.
Really?
It's really sad. So and so you as a smart actor, and somebody who might take care of your family or your community, I think we're going to do everything in our power to avoid detection from the government, and hide our wealth and move it offshore and do all these things that people would say, oh, that's dodgy. No, that's their survival and something that would otherwise take it through force and violence.
So if you have a private corporation who is digging for diamonds, mining for diamonds in Zimbabwe, I got to imagine one of the costs of doing business has got to be dealing with the Zimbabwe government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They would own it. They'll own portions of it, for sure.
Who would own what?
Like and now I'm maybe stepping a little outside of my territory here, but I think there's rules that if there's something like a natural resource, that the government must necessarily by law own parts of it.
They own parts of it. So is it wrong for me to say that when you buy a diamond, and if your diamond came from Zimbabwe, not only did the company make money, but probably the government, the mining company make money, or the seller, but so too did the Zimbabwe government or somebody within that Zimbabwe government?
Yeah, it'd be hard to say.
Yeah. So when you were doing your investigations and gathering the intelligence, what was the number one recurring theme that you would come across in terms of, as you would say, nefarious behavior? Or like, what was the crime that you would always find was taking place?
weapons, I guess.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. Yeah. They're definitely, especially across, like in regimes where militias or hold mines. It's the exchange. It would be an exchange of diamonds for weapons. That would be kind of a major one, I would say. But,
Oh, wow. So wait a second. So if I'm a company and I'm mining,
yeah.
I'm dealing with militias who are basically holding that mine hostage, so to say?
Not necessarily. I mean, you're going to have different phases of the mining process. So you're going to have the major mining companies extracting, and then those will be sold then on to the people, like middlemen, essentially diamantaires, that will then take raw diamonds and then kind of exchange them, turn them into jewelry, use them for other.
Where does the militia fit into that?
They may control one of the diamantaires, be linked to them. There might be an official front that will buy supply of raw diamonds, but they're actually attached to some sort of maybe other actor.
So in many different, would you say that in many parts of the world, especially those chaotic third world sort of situations, that the guns that are in the hands of these people are basically paid for through diamond mining?
Sort of back, I would say at the time. I mean, this is in the I guess the peak of the war on terror. I mean, and definitely there was even Al Qaeda elements in West Africa that were using diamonds as a means of currency. I mean, one of the things that's emerged, in recent years is and although there's something to be said about this, but the idea that Bitcoin is being used for criminal enterprise because it's anonymous, you can move it over borders kind of easily.
Yeah.
I think all of the principles why we need to pay attention to Bitcoin and how it can be used for criminal enterprise are the same things that apply for diamonds. So it's just an alternative means of kind of maybe sending money, bartering for whatever commodity you need, that kind of thing. So
just as a side note, and I know you're not a Bitcoin expert,
definitely,
but do you? I mean, when Bitcoin first came up, and to be quite honest, I still don't understand the damn thing.
Yeah.
To me,
I don't. Yeah.
To me, I walk into a 7-Eleven, I want a Coke, I got a $5 bill, it costs $2, I get $3 back. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the $5 was greater value, it only had one piece of paper. I handed that and I got back 3 pieces of paper that was lesser value. I understand that.
Yeah.
I don't understand this Bitcoin and mining for coins and all this other different stuff, and it's all mining out of a server. It just sounds like a lot of voodoo to me.
Yeah.
And so when you have a system based on voodoo, in many cases, right? You can't touch it, Bitcoin. You can't feel it. I can't use it inside. Like I can't pull it out of my pocket.
Yeah.
Is that just a petri dish for fraud?
I'm sure it is.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, this is I'm with you. Like I'm I wish I was a little bit more in tune, especially after sort of Trump's election and sort of the spike in Bitcoin. And just friends around me all of a sudden, just like, these massive windfalls. I'm like, damn, I guess I should have maybe paid attention to it. But I mean, it is. I mean, you, of course, kind of anything that's murky like that. I mean, there's going to be criminal opportunity for sure.
Of course. I mean, we just did a tour. You met him. I introduced you to the sheriff that's here in town. And we just did a tour of the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
And they have a whole section for investigations on Bitcoin crime, on all this, that kind of stuff. And, just see, even talking to the investigators, and they're getting all the stuff that, that you did. You could just see that they couldn't answer a lot of my questions because it's so new and it's so hard to understand.
Yeah.
I go back to Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, if you're doing deals for cash, there's only certain ways that you can get rid of cash.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to use digital, credit cards, we're going to be able to, knock on Visa's door or American Express's door and say, hand us over. But Bitcoin and wallets, and all this other different stuff that's so hard to tell. I mean, to me, and they're talking about, you know, the world going to a digital currency. I mean, that scares the living hell out of me.
Yeah, that's weird. That's definitely not my wheelhouse.
You know, we have one friend. I have a friend who calls you 007. Let's get into the part here where it really starts to get kind of juicy.
All right.
You get an invite, so to say, or the opportunity, we'll just keep it at that, to where now you're going to start to investigate ISIS.
Yeah.
We're just going to take a small break from talking to Andrew for a second and talk about DML CBD body pain relief oil. One of the conversations Andrew and I had off camera was about how much time he spent traveling, driving in the car, sitting. Same thing with me. Forever driving in the car across the country, doing my documentaries, always at the chair, doing the stuff on the laptop, the newsletters, the website, all that stuff. You go and you step up, and now all of a sudden your joints and your muscles, they're all killing you. And that was bothering me for the longest time. That's why my daughter and I came up with this Miracle Me formula with another girl who helped us develop it. It has 22 essential oils, aloe, and the most powerful CBD you can possibly imagine. You rub this on your body and all the pains seem to go away. It's unbelievable what it does. Now, if you look into why pain emerges, you'll understand how it is that the makeup of this Miracle Me is solving all of it by tamping things down. We have changed so many lives with Miracle Me Body Pain Relief Oil. It's the easiest thing in the world. You give it a little shake, you put it in, you rub it in your hands, you put it on your neck, you put it on your shoulders, you put it on your back, you put it on your legs. I put it on me everywhere, every single morning before I get dressed. It's amazing. Today, we're going to wind up giving you an opportunity to get it with a coupon, 25% off. Go to dmlcbd.com/miracle, MIRACLE, and when you're checking out, use coupon code ANDREW, inspired by my great guest today. That's ANDREW, 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 for 25% off. I am telling you, join the tens of thousands of people who have had their life completely changed. I don't care if you're 90, 70, 50, 30, you put this on, you will see pains go away like never before. Whether your knees, your hips, your neck, your arms, your chest, give it a shot. dmlcbd.com/miracle, coupon code Andrew for 25% off. And now we go back to Andrew.
When I think of ISIS, I mean, we just had this terror attack and they said, you know, the guy had the ISIS flag in his car, whatever.
Yeah.
I think everybody has the same feeling about ISIS. In fact, what triggers the mind. When ISIS first came, you talk about marketing for diamonds. ISIS was maybe the best marketer of all time. Because the purpose of marketing and advertising, if you will, is to bring attention to your brand. And I don't know if there was a brand that ever brought more attention to itself quicker than ISIS. Yeah. You want to get attention? Take 10 people, maybe Christians, put them on a beach, line them up, and literally at one time chop all their heads off, film it, and put it on the internet. You're going to get people to pay attention. And then when you want to outdo that one, then take them and put them in a car and light them on fire. And when you want to outdo that one, put them in a vat of acid. And when you want to outdo that one, put them in a cage and submit it with GoPro cameras watching the people drown as you submit it into a pool. I mean, each video was a little bit more Hollywood-esque than the next. And it was like, oh my God, who are these people? And before you knew it, everybody was frightened of ISIS. You're called in to do what?
The financiers. So the money movers that would have supported the regime at the time when they did hold territory.
So you're going in to find out, in short form, who's funding ISIS.
Yeah.
When you get an assignment like that, I mean, clearly you already saw the videos. You know that these guys are holding nothing back.
Yeah.
And you're not Muslim.
Right.
Right.
No.
When you're doing an investigation and intelligence gathering like that, where do you start?
I was being told by my bosses essentially the strategy that they thought was the best, which was to look at the other investigations that had started in terms of mass atrocities that ISIL had committed, and then to look for any economic aspect of those atrocities, and then lead out from there.
Now, one of the things we agreed to before you came on here is that we were not going to talk about who employers were or people that you were doing We could say Canada, but that's as far as we were going to say.
This is not for the state. This is not for the state of Canada.
Right. So and so you were doing these, and there's certain things we could talk about and we can't talk about. So we should kind of lay that out right now. But and this conversation is basically about, hey, learning what it's like to be somebody who has to carry out investigations and gathering. Sure. But you're brought in to do this, and so now you're finding where the money's coming from. Yeah. And so when can
I actually just maybe comment on that? The secrecy thing is, it's been one of my biggest pet peeves throughout my career. Is in people in the intelligence trade, I feel like there's two. There's those that are like secretive and say like, I can't tell you because you have to kill you kind of thing, which is like ultimate cliche. Yeah. And then there's those other individuals that you just talk to and you don't feel like they're holding a secret. And it's those that I think those are the real operators. Anybody that hides behind secrecy, it probably hasn't done anything. That's been my experience within the trade. But in this regard, I mean, and this is an experience where, having to reflect on what we're doing here is, I don't necessarily know that path. I've never walked that path in terms of talking about this work. And so it is just right now, for me, it's a matter of just not necessarily knowing what is a secret. And the intelligence trade for me is not about secrets. Secrecy might be a tactic in a particular moment, but ultimately, I think this message of intelligence gets lost on a lot of people, that secrecy is not its aim. Its aim is to find criminals, to find leads in order to support investigations and this kind of thing. And I think it gets all muddled up with sort of this concept of secrecy far too often. I don't know, so just say that, because I don't want to come across like one of these people that's just like hiding behind secrecy, but I just...
Of course.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I asked you if you asked me what my social security number was, I wouldn't tell you, even though I'm an honest guy, because there's certain things that don't need to be revealed.
Exactly.
And if I revealed my social security number, there would be crimes that would be committed as a result of that.
Exactly.
Right. Even worse, I know Ryan's social security number. If you ask me about Ryan's social security number, I'm not going to give it, because even though I'm not going to be impacted directly, I wouldn't do that to somebody else.
Exactly.
So I realized, so when I say that we agreed that we would not bring up certain things, there's no sense in bringing up people who employed you to do things. There's no value to that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a matter of not really trying to hold on to secrets. It's just a matter of being cautious in terms of the consequence of what you say. Yeah. And there's other people doing the work, and you don't want any negative consequence on them.
I mean, ISIS, still to this day, wants to end Western civilization. They want to take out anybody who's Christian. Yeah. They want the radical Muslim ideology to rule the world. That's a very dangerous thing. Very dangerous thing. I go back to Rudy Giuliani. To try to get into the mind of somebody who's ISIS, it's impossible. We don't think like that. If I say to you right now, hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to do the Our Father, and you say, I prefer you didn't do that, I'd be like, all right, fine. I don't think instantaneously I should cut your fucking neck off. But if you're a Muslim and you want to go and you want to do your prayer right now, and I say, no, you're not going to pray on my rugs, you're not going to pray in my place, you're not praying. It's just that simple. Yeah. I instantaneously become the infidel. And then by Islamic law, as the infidel, if you kill me, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a very dangerous mindset. So it's very important for us to know who's funding these people, who's funding that. And so I think the job that you were, given is one of the most important jobs in recent history. Let's go back.
Mm-hmm.
Day one, Andrew is sitting there. Day one, you're at a desk.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing you did?
Panicked. Yeah.
It was much easier chasing the diamonds.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually the first thing I did was because the team was just me to start, and then I had to build that team out.
Okay.
And so the first thing I did is said, who can help me?
Yeah.
That was the first thing.
Who wants to help me?
Who wants to help me? And so throughout my career, met people that I know do good work, can trust, and will get the job done. So I reached out to them and started to pull together people that, as contractors, that I knew I could rely on. That was probably day one.
Did you find people to be like, yeah, I'll do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
More so for the we need to kill these guys off than how much money am I getting paid?
Yeah, absolutely. Like even, one person that I employed, she talking with her, she even says like that was some of the more rewarding work I've ever done, and still working in government.
Yeah.
So when you're really driven by a mission, that's the most rewarding thing.
So then, day one, you hire your team.
Yeah.
Day two, assume is let's get to work.
For me, it was not to start and the small indicators from these other investigations, from that organized crime investigation background. It was, okay, let's start where the money is, go where the money is, and then we'll trace that back. I mean,
and where was the money?
Everywhere.
Give me a couple of spots. When people say everywhere.
The Gulf, like throughout the Gulf region.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Are you trying to find the money being used by the actual member of ISIS?
So the mandate that we embarked on was actually an atrocity financing kind of framework, which was odd. So we weren't necessarily looking for like the movement of money in the now in terms of funding terrorist acts. We were looking at the money that would have surrounded atrocities committed when it occupied territory. So it was kind of an international crimes. Yeah, we were looking backward and sort of the networks. Now, conveniently, those networks, even though the territory, like it was liberated, and the caliphate as actually a body that held territory was defeated, those financial networks still exist and still persist. So,
of course, because they're going to go on to fund the next one.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And you said in the very beginning of this interview that intelligence gathering isn't necessarily to get the crime that was committed. It's trying to prevent the next crime from being carried out. Mm. Okay. So when you say taking a look at atrocities, can you give me an example of an atrocity that happened? That you went back
under ISIL?
Yeah, that you actually looked at and said, that's a funny thing. Why do you call it ISIL and we call it ISIS?
It's just whatever you fancy. It's the L is Levant.
The L is Levant.
So sort of a historical kind of label for the region.
Okay. Yeah. Because it was funny, Obama used to call it ISIL instead of ISIS.
Yeah. ISIS is in...
You're reminding me of Obama. Okay. Don't do that, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. That's fair play. So we can call it ISIS.
We can call it ISIL.
Daesh, maybe.
That was the other one. Yeah. So we call it ISIL, ISIS. We know what you're talking about. Yeah. But I just wanted to set that up for people. It's the same thing. ISIS and ISIL, same thing. So, so ISIS had carried out a lot of bad atrocities, as you're saying.
Yeah.
So there had to be one that you looked at and said, okay, let's start here. Are you allowed to say which one you looked at?
Well, actually, I didn't. I looked at them all, looking at how there would have been a financial dimension to any of the atrocities committed as a result of sort of the legal framework of this having to link the actual crime to the financing, so that you had this kind of aiding and abetting kind of legal
right.
nexus.
You're looking for a war crime of some kind.
But I mean, ISIS carried out a range of atrocities, massacring the Yazidis as a community in northern Iraq, kind of a mystic sort of type of group that they viewed as heretics. They massacred. They even ate themselves. I mean, they massacred Shia. Christians, anything that essentially wasn't that sort of pure fundamentalist Sunni ideology.
So when you looked at, let's just say, for instance, they killed 100 Christians.
Yeah.
You would look at that atrocity and then try to find where money played in.
Yeah, exactly.
How would money play into that atrocity?
Well, and it's kind of speaks to the Bitcoin. At the time, a lot of people were like, how is ISIL using Bitcoin? And I laughed at this. I said, well, they may, like, pockets of it in the developed world might use it in some aspect of plotting a terrorist act, but in the actual caliphate itself, I mean, a computer was unheard of to a lot of these people. And so a lot of the financial aspects were things like cattle rustling, like taking
what is it?
cattle rustling, like stealing cattle, stealing livestock.
Stealing cattle.
So you had, like, the Yazidi were an agrarian kind of pastoral group. So the things the most valued to them, they didn't have any money. They just had their goats.
And that was their money.
And so they took that. So rounding up, just any type of, farming equipment, or just maybe there's some like gold or some precious things that they might have. And then it was aggregated. It was taking that away from an entire community group of people, and then sort of translating that into money or hard currency.
So ISIS goes into XYZ town, kills a whole bunch of Christians,
It takes all their
takes
cattle.
all their farming
Yep.
equipment. Now ISIS can't do a whole lot with tractors and hoes.
Right.
So now they're going to do is they're going to put that in the black market or the aftermarket,
Yep.
and you're following where that is going.
Yeah, it's more
Who's
profiteering.
paying for that? Who's profiting from that?
Yeah.
And then what they're doing is they're paying ISIS for that, what I would consider illegal equipment, stolen equipment. And then now ISIS has the money to go out and feed themselves and pay their soldiers and buy more weapons and that nature.
Exactly.
So you were really looking for the person on the other end of that transaction. Now, question being is, does the person who bought all of those tractors and those hoes, did they know that they were actually buying from ISIS?
Some did. I mean, that's even going back to kind of how nebulous this stuff becomes when you look at it. I mean, it's just like you have the desire to say, okay, there is going to be a clear actor here, or a clear group of financiers that we can sort of target, and there's going to be a Cayman account with ISIS money in it that will seize that one account. But it's just so nebulous and so difficult to kind of understand the totality of it. So
It's a difficult web to weave through.
absolutely. So what we focused in on was the money movers, the people that would have been moving money in and out, and then
Of ISIS itself.
of ISIS, and then how they would have aided and abetted the group in commission of those crimes.
And what did you more or less come away with?
I mean, there's.
Are you permitted to say who it is that was funding?
Well, that I think I don't know. Actually, I don't.
I would
don't
say
know if
that
I am not.
it's probably
But-
got to be
but-
public knowledge.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of. I think you can definitely take a look at. But there'll be statements like it was certain elements were state funded.
So in other words, somebody will say, we found out, and I'm just being fictitious here. Well, maybe I'm not. I don't know. But we found out that Syria was actually funding ISIS.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're putting it at the state level versus going deeper into the
Right.
state level.
And I think that's a huge disservice to sort of maybe understand the problem. It's like it's too superficial. Like, let's say there was a Gulf state said, "Oh, they funded ISIL." Well, did they? Was it a policy of that state to do it?
Yeah.
So yeah, you may have traced certain amount of funds, a couple, tens of thousands of dollars to that state, or vice versa, or back from that state into the the caliphate. And it's like, well, who actually sent it? And
Right.
like any government, or any country, it's a consortium of just competing powers and people and ethnic groups and all sorts of things. So there might be a little pocket that's sympathetic to a cause, whereas on the other side of maybe the halls of the government, there may have been an agency that would have been opposed it. So it's really difficult to have ever said that there was like state sponsorship of it.
Of course. Look, just here in the United States, just to get off ISIS for a second and go back to what you're talking about, there is a group here. I can't remember the name of the group. They came after me as well. They formed out of nowhere, and they were going after conservative voices that were in the news business and trying to discredit us. So this way we couldn't get advertisers to run advertisements with us. It turned out to be that we found out that they were funded by the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense of the United States is funding a company, a private organization, to crack down on conservative voices. So this way we can't be monetized anymore. If I can't monetize my material, I'm out of business. So now, NewsGuard. It was called NewsGuard. That's it. Yeah, NewsGuard. Yep. Thank you. So NewsGuard. So NewsGuard is being funded in part with a grant through the Department of Defense. And you say to yourself, wait a second, why does the Department of Defense want to crack down on conservative voices? Now, does the Department of Homeland Security agree with that? You know, does the Department of Justice, does the Department of Education agree with that? Yeah. So you can have where one department goes a little rogue, takes their budget and spends it, and yet it's going to be, you know, the United States is the ultimate person who's going to pay responsibility to that when it's a news item. So what you're saying is that there could have been a department in a state that was actually funding it. Was your job to go find that department and the person within that department?
No, that's too much of a political level. Okay. So we were looking at really the ISIL actors that would have profited and moved money specifically, but getting a bit too high. I mean, we didn't have the political chops to deal with that type of stuff.
I hear you. So was most of the funding from ISIS coming from the Middle East?
And this is the nature of the funding. So in a lot of ways, ISIS had generated its own wealth from the control of territory. So it was for all intents and purposes, a de facto state. It had control over the local economy and all the elements of the local economy, which, of course, in oil-rich Iraq is oil and antiquities and this kind of thing. So for a lot of it, it generated its own wealth. It didn't need sort of like traditional funding like a terrorist organization might need. But then you had all of these foreign terrorist fighters or foreign fighters coming in to fight on its behalf. They, in some units, might have been funded sort of more broadly by benefactors, but in a lot of ways it's just, you know, rogue kind of, you know, people with a gang mentality perhaps looking for their tribe kind of coming in, and maybe their families would support them. So it was kind of like microfinancing in a lot of ways for a lot of the fighters themselves. So it's kind of this kind of mix of different things.
The investigations ever come back and lead you to a country where you said, oh my gosh?
Well, if you follow the money in the Middle East, you get to a lot of sort of murky places and a lot of, so-called corruption, right? So it instantly gets you to the holders of power, and ultimately then you're not playing an investigative game anymore, looking for bad actors. You would have to jump into a political realm where you're starting to deal with, like, you know, geopolitics, and so it has a ceiling. You can only take it so far, and then once you pass that ceiling, that's somebody else's. That's a geopolitical role.
So let's just say, for instance, that in your investigation, you were led back to see that funding for ISIS was actually coming from the United States.
Yeah.
At that point, you just take it and you hand it over to your bosses.
Yeah.
And then you tap out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You tap out. Yeah. And I would imagine, you know, I don't know if you'd want to say that sort of thing or not say that sort of thing, but did you ever come across anything like that, be it the United States or some other country, to where you're like, wow, they're involved in this? Or you never got that high in?
No, we did. Locally, we did. So within Syria and Iraq, absolutely got to the, what do you call it, the annals of power?
Okay.
The channels of power?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does ISIS, the bad actors in Iraq, Syria, any of these places, do they know that you're doing these investigations?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, you have to. I mean, there's no such thing as kind of like a supranational body that will go and investigate things. So you're always in a place at under the authority of whatever regime, which can make it dangerous. So you sort of have to do it right. You have to, you know, stay in your lane a lot of times, or you'll be shut down. So
where are you physically when you're doing these investigations?
Myself, I was in Iraq.
You were in Iraq doing it?
I was in Iraq, yeah.
when you're in Iraq doing it, were you ever in a situation where you're like, I'm surrounded by ISIS?
I'm sure I was. I just was not. You're not aware of it. You kind of just move in your bubble, and you're not necessarily that aware of the things that perhaps the dangers that lurk around the corners, and that's sort of maybe the thing that weighs on you, right? That's
How long were you in Iraq?
3 years.
Is it a total shithole?
Yeah. No offense to the lovely people that are there, but
no offense to the lovely
it's
members of
struggling.
ISIS.
it struggles.
Yeah.
It's a place that struggles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've got one more set of investigations before we get a little bit more of yourself. But I mean, when you ever sitting in Iraq and you're saying to yourself, what the F am I doing here?
Yeah. This is actually sort of now to the theme. Over the past, 5 years of investigations in Iraq and Ukraine, that's almost the daily thought I've had now. It's like I'm getting to a point where I'm not believing in this at all anymore.
Why? Why? I mean, and we're going to get to the Ukraine-Russia stuff in a second. What about it do you no longer believe in?
The organizations themselves doing it.
Meaning the people who are hiring you.
Yeah, and the people around that surround it, and the people that necessarily it's not all. I mean, there's some great men and women that do this across agencies and across countries, but just generally, it becomes very daunting when you're feeling like you're fighting the organizations themselves rather than focused on the mission at hand.
And the mission is to prevent crimes or just stop them.
Uncover them, detect them, disrupt bad actors, bring to light things that are truly nefarious, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you just weeks can go by. It's like, have we achieved anything on the mission? No. But we've talked a lot about our protocols and our standards, that kind of thing. It's like, whoa.
It sounds like it's kind of I think the closest thing I've ever seen to what it is you're saying or witnessed is when I was doing my films on immigration, and you would interview the Border Patrol agents, and you could see that there was a lack of morale. They signed up, many of these guys and gals who sign up for the Border Patrol are former military. And look, the U.S. military is voluntary. Anybody who does that is either trying to escape a bad area that they live in and say, this is my only option, or they're very patriotic and they want to help their country. And when they leave that, they figure the next thing I can do is become a Border Patrol agent and protect my borders, only to learn that they are very high-priced Uber drivers, because all they're doing is picking up migrants from the border, driving them to a station to give them meals, food, fingerprints, and then to a bus depot to send them off to somewhere USA. That's very, very disheartening, and it crushes the morale, and they say, hey, I want to do it. I mean, one of the things we know that we're hearing a lot of is that now Border Patrol agents are calling back in and saying, hey, now with Trump, I'd like to come back in. I want to be part of the Border Patrol again. Is that kind of what you're talking about, in the sense that you feel as if you're just going through an investigation because somebody has to check a box?
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel
or
good.
you're investigating for the wrong reasons.
Give me an example.
Perhaps, and this is where can't necessarily talk about current things that are occurring, but it just feels like the reason why somebody chose an investigation is not because that's the most significant investigation, but it's because that'll have the greatest political effect if that's achieved, and if the outcome is achieved. And
so they're not trying to prevent a crime or to reveal a crime. They're trying to take a political edge.
It feels like that in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, even what we spoke about earlier in terms of choosing the investigations and resources and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just feeling like the decisions upon high are being made for not the reasons why we want to reduce crime, want to achieve kind of public safety. It's like the person making the choice is like, how do we look the best? And it's just like sometimes you just, okay, I don't know if I have faith in this system anymore, It's just kind of a sad thing.
So we here in the U.S. We've sort of had a problem with our intelligence agencies as of the last few years, and they're supposed to be gathering intelligence on things like gangs and crimes, and yet we found that they were doing intelligence on the president of the United States and his election teams and all this other different stuff. So I guess the question is, because I think people have lost sight of what it means to be a person who's in intelligence. So based on your investigations and your intelligence gathering and seeing how it is that ISIS was indeed getting their money and the people who were supporting them or the states that were supporting them to do it, I'm wondering if you come away saying, gee, that was easy for them, and if it was that was easy for them. In the same way that the cartels say, hey, man, there's always going to be drug addicts in the U.S. We'll always have a market. Yeah. Will ISIS always have a bank?
I think the answer, perhaps in a very sort of macro way, is yeah. If you have a cause, you're going to find funding for that cause. But it also, I would say, that it doesn't have to be big money. Like in a lot of ways, for terrorist activity, for sure. I mean, you can plan an operation on a shoestring, right? Yeah. I mean, for one investigation was the attack on the Dusit Hotel in Nairobi. Mm-hmm. Those individuals, I mean, did it with almost no support. It was like gift cards from like family for all the restaurants in Nairobi, being held up in a friend's house, these types of things. Like, it virtually spend no money. So yeah, it's as long as you can. If you have a cause, unfortunately, I think where there's a will, there's a way. So if somebody has a bone to pick, there's going to be a threat there.
Which is really scary if you think about it from a looking out, going forward. Whether it's drones, right? In the old days, you used to have to be able to fly an F-16 in order to be able to do something from the air. Yeah. Now all you need is a $100 drone.
Yeah,
and a will to kill.
And that's reshaping the battlefield for sure.
Yeah. So how do you stop that? Yeah. That's exactly. I go back to that Rudy Giuliani conversation when we were talking about 9/11. He had said at the time that we did the interview, it was probably going back about 9 years ago. He had said the reason why he didn't think that we experienced another 9/11 since that tragic day was because they were trying to outdo what they had already done. And I said, I disagree with you. I think they're just plotting in a different way to where they're gathering people all over the country, and they're going to carry out a lot of little tiny attacks that are going to get us in the heart and make us disrupt the way that we do our life. And you look at New Orleans, right? Yeah. How long until ISIS or these bad actors are taking over a school bus and doing it at schools and this and that? That's almost impossible to stop. Yeah. And to your point, it's like, hey, I remember asking you about it when we first talked about ISIS, not on camera. I was like, wow, did you find transactions that were like, hundreds of millions of dollars? And you're like, no, they were there with ISIS and the oil that they were taking. Yeah. But we saw a lot of little $100 things. And it's amazing how $100, a nut bag and a drone can change a city. Yeah. So with that said, let's go into the final chapter here of the investigation stuff. And I know, again, we've already discussed this. You can't share everything, but now you find yourself going from Iraq and ISIS
to Ukraine,
to Ukraine and the Russia conflict. It's almost like you got a death wish, brother. So,
yeah. My mom's not so impressed.
She's not talking to you. No. So anyway, with that in mind, I mean, why do you decide that you're going to go into the hotbed of Kiev and deal with Putin and Zelensky and all that we've seen there?
I don't know. Actually, I don't have an answer to that. To me, I mean, watching everything unfold in the full-scale invasion, was like, this is quite a geopolitical game changer in my mind. So I thought, that's I wanted to be a part of it, and it sounds a bit weird, but
No, it doesn't.
I mean, one of my driving forces is wanting to know the ground truth. It's just kind of my curiosity.
Sure.
I don't want to be told something. I want to experience it for myself and understand it.
Okay.
And then that's sort of, so this is a major world event right now.
Yeah.
I want to understand it.
You
I
wanna
don't
get
want to be
involved.
told about it. I want to go and understand it.
Wow.
Yeah,
You're so
firsthand.
whether you
Yeah.
recognize it or not, you're a bit of an adventure seeker.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So your next adventure is there in the middle of Ukraine, and you're investigating or gathering intelligence on war crimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Are we allowed
Not
to talk?
intelligence, just investigations.
Investigations.
Yeah.
Okay, just investigations. And are we allowed to talk about the big three?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think we'll kind of
Okay.
keep it general.
So then you kind of explain to me then what you can say about what it is that you were doing and what it is that was happening that was bothersome.
Well, I mean, I think one of the really unfortunate things here is this is, Ukraine has become quite a political topic, and so it's hard to maybe kind of talk about this in sort of an objective way, right? What is the objective thing here? And at the core of this, I would say, is whatever you think about either side, whether of this conflict, there was a state and another state invaded.
Mm-hmm.
And we can back, on the political level, the geopolitical, you can back that up. You can talk about kind of, well, is it a just war theory? Was there an existential threat to Russia, and all this kind of stuff. That's, I think, besides the point that one force occupied another state, and in occupying another country, war crimes, atrocities were committed.
Are they worse than we think? Or are they less than it's being sold?
Yeah, I mean, if you look for them, and then in the age of instant information, I mean, you can absolutely go look in the public domain and find the extent of the atrocities. It's being able to now navigate this space in which what is real, what is not, what is disinformation, what is not, and then actually saying, okay, if I'm getting that piece of information and this is actually real, it's not AI, it's actually real, and this is a crime being committed by one force on the other. That's the hard part that you're navigating right now. But having navigated that, yeah, absolutely, atrocities have been committed.
War crimes?
War crimes, yeah. I mean, that's not even a controversial thing.
These are war crimes obviously carried out by the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's even controversial to say that almost in any conflict you would ever have, war crimes will have occurred. Right. There will be individuals or units or actors that just, unfortunately, the fog of war, the chaos of everything, it's war. Bad things, of course, happen, and in times those bad things will cross those lines in terms of breaches of whatever convention, Geneva Convention and stuff like that. It happens.
One of the things that Americans have seen, especially on X, I don't know. This country is sort of divided on this whole thing.
Yeah,
you've got the one. And I think, for conservatives, Tucker Carlson has played a very big role in setting the narrative that Putin is not as bad as the left wants to make Putin out to be. Mm-hmm. And, so then you've got this whole Zelensky's always coming over here dressed, I call it his IRS clothing to make it look like he doesn't have a dime. Yeah. He's dressed over here in his little brown fatigues. And then, people are like, yeah, when he's going home to his palace because we keep on dishing billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so the people of the United States who don't want to give over those billions of dollars, they look at somebody like Tucker Carlson, he's going to be like, hey, you know what? Putin's not that bad, right? Then you got the other side of it that wants to sell, mostly the Democrats, that Putin is the worst thing that has ever been, created since Hitler, and that he's carrying out all these atrocities, kidnapping people, torturing people, you name it, it's all been reported. So when you look at that, there's this division about what we should and should not do. One of the things that came out that really pissed people off was that there's new discotheques and bars and restaurants all being built, and like it's a happy-go-lucky place over there in Ukraine. Did you experience that? Did you see that things went from rubble to late night discos where it's all happy and hey, we're dancing on America's dime? Did you see that sort of thing, or is that did they just shoot film from one place and then try to make it sound like this was the sort of thing that was spreading wide?
Yeah, my experience. I mean, the one thing about Ukraine is it's a bit of a weird thing to transition from 20 years of counterinsurgency towards this conflict that is very much conventional. There's hundreds of miles of front line, and that is where things sort of occur. And then there's sort of the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. Ukraine on a whole is not burning. There's the massive intense conflict along a front line, and then missile strikes to hit targets.
So if we were to do it in the United States, the front line is California. Yeah. They're not feeling it in New Hampshire.
Or the parallel between Canada. And
But I'm to kind of get that feeling. If Canada, there you go. So if you want to say Canada is invading America, they're feeling it in the Dakotas, but they're not feeling it in Texas.
Yeah,
right.
And there's going to be certain realities there, and I mean at the core of it though, is people.
Yeah.
So if you live there, and there's a conflict that's raging around you, how are you going to live your life? Are you going to always just hunker in a shelter, or are you going to start to settle into this sort of new normal where you're actually living, you're hanging out with your family or friends, you are trying to live as much of a normal life as possible? I think that's what's going to occur. And so, like it's saying Kiev, there are people that live their life, but and they will go to a bar and they will go out for dinner, and there are things that function there, but it's not normal. You are out for dinner and all of a sudden there's a missile strike, and there's drones that are, so there's an air raid that goes off, and all of a sudden, the sky is flooded with drones, and air defense shooting it down, and shrapnel coming through people's windows. I mean, so you're going to get on with your life, but it is not normal. And so, I mean, you could film something that looked like everybody was hot to trot and, having a honky tonk or something, and look, everything's normal, but you've just captured a moment in which, the greater situation is not normal. Does that make sense? So?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Especially being somebody who understands how to operate a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're allowed, how long were you in Ukraine?
2 years.
2 years.
For the past 2 years.
And
almost exactly.
Was it almost a daily occurrence that you're wondering whether or not you're going to get hit with a missile strike?
Yeah, I guess to that sort of personal danger, there are people that it affected. It didn't for a few of us. It didn't affect us at all. We just kind of got on with it. An air raid happens, and then you start to joke about it. I mean, the normal thing is like, okay, anybody brand new, air raid goes off. It's like, where's the shelter? And then after you've been there for a time, it's like, okay, you don't go to the shelter anymore, especially in the middle of the night. I mean, you're not gonna. We joke about having a tactical duvet. You just sort of pull the covers over your head and just try to go back to sleep. So it just becomes super normal pretty quickly, actually. And then you're not really concerned with it. And you kind of have this mentality of it's your time, it's your time.
Yeah. So I understand we can't talk about the investigations. Yeah. And I think everybody understands you can't, because it's unlike ISIS. It's still going on in terms of that sense. But it does, I kind of want to wind this up now with getting to the theme. 5 minutes here, but tell me about the day that you decide I'm done.
Yeah. It was not easy. I had some time left on the clock, and it was exactly a moment when there was just too many things that were, I don't believe in this. There is so much nonsense that surrounds this, and I don't know what we're doing.
The investigations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing, and I'm in charge of running aspects of these investigations, and I don't know what we're doing. Like, I can't make sense of it, and but yet you're sort of taking the punches politically internal to the organization. Kind of, you're out there on the front line of it, talking with victims, and they're telling you their story, and then you take that story back. And it is people that have just been their apartment has just been decimated by a Russian missile, and it's like, wow, that's mind-boggling. And then you take that back to others, and it's just deadpan, like they can't relate to it, so they dismiss it. And it was just this flurry of, I can't do this anymore, because. And it wasn't easy, because I'm feeling like a quitter right now, and
Yeah.
I hate that. And so it's like, have I confused the mission, and am I quitting on that mission? And I think that's the one thing, is the mission wasn't clear to me, and I didn't know why I was doing it. And so what am I doing? And then I told my mom, and she burst into tears in a happy way that I was leaving.
She's like, my son's coming home.
Yeah.
So getting on that, because that's a very, I can see, you kind of get caught up a little bit and choked up.
Yeah.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be
Yeah.
sorry. It's a very difficult thing. I mean,
Yeah.
to be in a war zone, and it goes back to what we talked about when we were talking about the trafficking in Canada. I asked you what kept you up. You said thinking about a victim. It's humanizing, right? So when we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, for many of us, it has simply become, we're sending another check. For you, it's, I'm on the ground, another person just got their body blown up, their home blown up, their child stolen, whatever it was, their husband tortured.
Yep.
You're witnessing this. And I guess what you're saying is, if I could speak for you, what you're saying is, I'll do that all day long if I'm going out and doing my investigations, finding the answers, giving the information over. We're using that information to make things better. What you're seeing is, you're risking your life. You're going and dealing with these very highly emotional, very life-changing events. You're bringing that information back. And it's almost like somebody said to you, okay, good, go do it again. And it's like, wait a second. Why am I doing this? Why aren't you doing something with the information? And at some point, you just tap out. And I haven't known you enough, but I feel like I've learned even more about you in these 2 hours here. Is, you've got morals. And so there's that part of you right now where you're struggling and saying, did I just leave people who needed me in order to gather that information and hand it back over? So not only did I quit on myself, that's the question you're asking, did I quit on myself, but did I quit on these people who now don't have me? So that's like dying by fire and by drowning. So, you've got your own self-interest, and then of course these other people. And my sense is, don't think like that. My sense is, you did the best you possibly could. And, this war and the situation that we're here with is bigger than any one person.
Yeah.
But, so with that said, now you're sitting here and you're wondering what's next. And it's funny, because usually people, when they're in their mid-40s, they're looking and saying, hey, I only got 10 more years. 10 more years, and then I hit my 20.
Yeah.
Or they say, I got another 5 years, and I get my bonus. In your case, in mid-40s, you're starting all over again. You're like,
very frightening.
Yeah,
very
you're
frightening.
like, where do I start?
Yeah.
That's got it. That's an investigation of its own.
Yep.
Do you ever see yourself being pulled back into that world?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure if an opportunity came knocking tomorrow,
Yeah.
okay, we got something.
Is opportunity based on money or opportunity based on that flame that you have inside of you to where you want to make the world a better place?
Yeah, I think that's the draw.
Yeah.
Being part of something that is to protect, is to be part of an effort to try and right the wrongs of the world. I think that's a very noble mission, but it's
Last question for you. As a guy who's basically been chasing crime, dangerous gangs, dangerous terrorists, or the dangerous wars, has this sort of given you a greater appreciation for places that have peace? Or has it given you a sense of you always have to sleep with one eye open because you can't trust anything and anybody, even in places of peace?
Yeah, I mean, I think the former. I think it's very much an appreciation for places with peace, with like a calmness. And, even as an outsider coming to the United States with all of the sort of rhetoric around, the turmoil and culture wars and stuff like that, I mean, my perspective is, I mean, this is an amazing place because you can have those conversations. Yeah, and that dialogue is as crazy as it can actually as it gets. It's way better than living under sort of like a tyrannical regime somewhere else, for sure. So I appreciate being here where you still can have an opinion and you're not going to be persecuted for it, whether it's in an organization or in a state.
Yeah. That being said, I'm going to lie. I have one more question because
okay.
I'm having this conversation with you and I'm forgetting the fact that you're not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
Do you think that Americans underappreciate the actual freedoms that we are given between the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the right to carry arms, what have you?
Yeah.
The fact that you and I can sit here and have a conversation like this, where we could be critical if we want to, or we could be, we could say whatever we want. I mean, do you think Americans underappreciate the value of that based on what you've seen around the world?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, the joke sometimes is you complain about something and you sort of say first world issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think, a lot of it can be taken for granted in it, and if you don't like this place, try anywhere else. Like, it's weird when yeah.
Well, that's it for us on Life After 50 for this week. Make sure that you check in next week for our next episode. We have one every week for all 52 weeks of the year. Do not forget to go to dmlcbd.com/miracle, MIRACLE. At dmlcbd.com/miracle, you can get a bottle of Miracle Me 6.7 ounce body pain relief oil with 25% off using the coupon code Andrew, inspired by obviously Andrew Wright today. That is Andrew is the coupon code ANDREW at dmlcbd.com/miracle. Until the next time, may God bless you, your family, these United States, and for all those people who are living it up, life after 50. We'll talk to you soon.